this is talking about how to add two sign numbers. If the two numbers have the same sign, so we're talking about positive 5s and negative 2s, that kind of thing. If they have the same sign, then you're going to add their magnitudes, which magnitudes like absolute value, you're just going to add the two numerical values, ignoring the sign, but then you keep the sign. So here's the first example. We're supposed to add negative 6 plus negative 8. And if you have a negative 6 plus negative 8, the rule says if they have the same sign, which they do, we're adding two numbers with the same sign, we add the magnitude. So 6 plus 8, and you can use your calculator, that's going to give us 14. So that's 14, but we keep the sign of the two numbers we were adding. So they were both negative, so we keep that. It's going to be a negative 14. I also want to introduce more with the calculator, so I need to show you a couple of buttons here. Let's see. Make sure this is on the screen here. Okay. I know the display you can't see, but this little button down here that I'm pointing at, this button right here is your negative button. It's not exactly the same as your subtract button. In real life, negatives and subtractions are like 99% the same. But technically, the subtraction key is like a verb. You're doing something. A negative key is like an adjective. You're describing the number. It's a negative 6. And so when we're typing one of these into our calculator, we want to use the negative button if it's a negative number. So let me go ahead and do this one. I'm going to turn my calculator on. And it's hard for me to get this whole thing in the display. Let me just zoom out for a second here. Okay. And I want to type negative 6. So notice I'm going to hit the negative key that's down at the bottom here. Negative 6 plus, and I'm going to open the parentheses, negative 8, close the parentheses, equals. And let me zoom in just so you can see what the calculator did with that. Okay. When I typed the negative, it just typed it up a little bit higher. Negative 6 plus negative 8, and then I hit equals, and it gives me the negative 14. You can use your calculator as much or as little as you want to when you're going through these problems. It's up to you, but let's go ahead and take a look at example 2. Okay, so it says add negative 5 plus 3. So this time we have different signs. The two numbers have different signs. This one's a negative 5, but we're adding just a regular 3, so that's a plus 3. If the signs are different, it says, let's see, move that over just a touch. It says if the signs are different, you subtract the magnitude. So I have to subtract the 5 and the 3 and get a 2, and then I keep the sign of the larger number. So a negative 5 and a positive 3, they're going to work against each other. This is like going to your mailbox and you have like a Visa bill for $5, and you have a paycheck. And I know these are small numbers, but just using the example. So if I owe $5 from one, I open up my mail and I owe $5 to one company, but I also get a paycheck, or maybe it's a rebate or something for $3, then the $3 will kind of start helping me pay off that $5, but there still would be 2 left over, so that would leave us with a negative 2 result. And let me just go ahead and do that one on the calculator as well. I'm going to hit clear, and just like before, it's kind of hard to get it in, so I'm going to take the screen off, and I'm going to have the buttons be what you can see. So negative 5, so I hit this button down here, plus 3 equals, and you can see in the display, negative 5 plus 3 equals a negative 2. Okay, hopefully you're somewhat familiar with these. Let's keep going. This next example has more numbers, and when we go through this in a little more detail, when we actually get to lesson number 6, we're going to go through this in more detail. Today I'm just practicing mostly calculator. So we'll have more ways to think about this. But for now, let's just go ahead and I'll hit clear. I'm going to zoom out to see if I can get a little more of the, I think you can see it's hard to see the rules when I go that small, but I think it's easier to see the whole calculator. So let's just do it that way for at least a moment. I can fiddle a little bit. Okay. So that should show us enough. So negative 17 plus 5 plus, open parentheses, negative 3, close the parentheses, plus 7. Okay? And I'm going to zoom in. Well, actually, I'll hit equals first, then I'll zoom in on the display. Oop, wrong way. Sorry for the headache. Well, okay, interesting. Once I hit equals, some of it's off the screen, so you don't actually see the final plus 7 that was typed in. There is a little arrow up there. If I use my arrow keys, I could go back and forth. If the expression is bigger than what is displayed, it'll still hold it all up there, and you can use your arrow keys if you want to double check what you've typed. But that's the answer. Notice with the calculator, I'm not using so much the rules that we're talking about. When we're using the calculator, it knows the rules. Okay, so here's a subtraction, and there are rules that we're going to talk about for this, and let me go ahead and show you that rule. Okay, and boy, this is a pain today trying to get this to work out, but I'm going to try to zoom in on the subtraction rule here. Okay, wow. This just goes better in regular class, so sorry about all the adjustments here. But subtraction of signed numbers. You can change from a subtraction to an addition, but you change the sign of the number that's being subtracted. You're going to change it from being a subtraction to being an addition, and you're going to change the sign of the second number. Okay, so let's take a look at that. If I use the rule, it says that if you're subtracting signed numbers, that you change it to an addition. Okay, and I keep the first number the same, so it was a negative 11, it stays negative 11. I change from subtraction to addition, and I change this from a negative to a positive. And if it's a positive, I wouldn't have to write it. So when I go to type this in my calculator, plus a positive 7 is just plus 7. So let me go ahead and show you that. Well, if you were going to do this without the calculator, let's talk about that again. If you're going to continue without the calculator, this is like having a Visa bill of $11 and a paycheck of $7. You're going to still owe $4. You subtract the two. They eat away at each other. 11 minus 7 is 4, and the negative 1 out. If I do it on my calculator, negative 11 plus 7 equals, and it's showing me a negative 4. Okay? Now, you could have done this entire thing on the calculator, so let me just go back to the beginning, and let me forget about the stuff I wrote out, and let's see, if I push this up, maybe if I put this down here, and I'm going to type pretty much exactly what I see here. I'm going to type negative 11, so you can't see the button. I'm hitting that little button, not the subtraction, but that little one way at the bottom, negative 11. And then the subtraction button, minus, open parentheses, negative 7, close parentheses. So again, there's rules here, but the calculator knows the rules. When I hit equals, it's going to take care of all that, and it gives me the correct result of negative 4. Okay? If you don't have your calculator right now, and you're kind of going through this more as a spectator sport, that's fine. You can watch me do it. The benefit of getting a calculator as soon as possible and kind of practicing through, not just with these lessons 6, but with lessons 4 and 5, is previously, if you didn't have a calculator and you just used any old calculator you found, the one on the screen, the one on your calculator, it was mostly additions, subtractions. Now some of the expressions are getting so complicated that having a consistent handheld calculator that you get used to, you just need that. Wait till you see some of the complex expressions that we come across in the next few units. And when we do, on a calculator, you can kind of just type what you see. And so it's going to be well worth it. Okay, so another subtraction here. Example 5, minus 3, minus 8. Now, let me just go to real life real quick. If it was 3 degrees below 0, and it gets 8 degrees colder, some of you kind of can sense minus 3, minus 8 more would take us down to negative 11. Or let's say I already owe $3 to my brother, and then I subtract 8 more, I borrow 8 more. Well, then I owe him 11. You can kind of see the rule that that works out here, but we're going to get a result of negative 11. Let's just go ahead and do this one on the calculator real quick. Let me zoom out, just have a little bit more on the screen here. And I'm just going to type what I see. Now remember, this negative in front of the 3 is like the adjective. It's the button that's way at the bottom. This negative 3. When I subtract 8, I'm going to hit minus the subtraction button, minus 8, and hit equals. And let me slide that down now. Negative 11. Okay. Here's a real complicated looking problem at the end. Question number 6. And what I'm going to tell you, when we actually get to lesson 6, we're going to talk more about how to do this type of question following all the rules. But today's purpose is to get more practice with our calculator. So let me go ahead and just go down the line on this one and see if we can just type the whole thing in. Let me see if I can get more of this on screen. I'll try to get the calculator and the problem on screen at the same time. Okay. Well, now you can see what the answer is going to be, so let's check our work, see if we get it. Actually, if I push this off. Okay, let's see if I push this off this direction. Bring the calculator here, I could probably get it all on screen simultaneously. Okay, let's give it a shot. I'm going to hit clear, and then I'm going to do 8 plus, open parentheses. Keep in mind that's a negative 17, so I'm going to hit this little button way at the bottom here, the negative button, negative 17. Close the parentheses, subtract, and then open the parentheses. I'm going two-handed here because I'm going to lose track where I was. When I open the parentheses, there's a negative 5 inside, and so that's the little negative button down at the bottom, negative 5. And close the parentheses, subtract 9, minus 9. And you can see a lot of it's off screen already. There are the arrow keys if I want to double check it, but I think we're good. I'm just going to hit equals, and it tells me that the result is minus 13, which is what the paper said over there. Okay. Well, now we get to multiplication. It's asking us to multiply. First, without the rule, I'm just going to see what my calculator gives me. Negative 5 times negative 8. Well, that's the negative 5. Open the parentheses. Type negative 8. Close the parentheses. And I hit equals. And sure enough, it gives me a positive 40. Okay? Now, why does it do that? Let me bring the multiplication rule over. And I know this is really small. Actually, let me zoom in for a bit, and we'll just talk about the rule. Multiplication and division have the same rule. You simply multiply or divide the numbers. So we had a 5 and we had an 8. We multiplied and got a 40. But to see whether it's positive or negative, the key is the same for multiplication and or division. If the numbers have the same sign, then when you multiply or divide, you get a positive. If they're different signs, you get a negative. It's not the same with addition up above. It was bigger, smaller. Which one was bigger is the sign you kept. with multiplication and division, it does not matter which of the two numbers is bigger or smaller, or what order they're being multiplied in or divided in. It's same or different. Same gives you a positive, different gives you a negative. So let's go ahead and take a look at that result again. It said to multiply these, and 5 times 8 is 40, and the sign, because they were the same sign, you always get a positive in a multiplication. And again, our calculator knows the rules, so that's where it's kind of nice that we have the rules that we want you to look at and get comfortable with, but our calculator also knows the rules, so that'll save the day if you ever kind of glitch out and forget. Okay, so here's a negative times a positive, so the result's going to be negative. It doesn't matter which of these is bigger or smaller, it's that they're different, so the result will be a negative. And the numerical part is just whatever you get if you multiply 17 and 6. And so let's just do the whole thing on the calculator. I'm going to type the negative button, 17 times 6, it equals, and it gives me a negative 102. Okay. Next example. It's a multiplication with a whole bunch of fun stuff going on, and no problem. We can just go right down the line. So if any of you are trying this, here's some things I'll tell you. If you prefer to type it as is, which is kind of the safe thing to do, then all those parentheses will cause all the multiplications to occur. If you decide you'd rather just hit the times key instead of all the parentheses, you could type negative 3 times 4 times negative 5 times negative 2, etc. I'm going to type it as is. One other warning, some calculators, if you don't specifically put the times key, some calculators don't know that it's multiplication, but this one does. So let's go ahead and do it. Negative 3, I'm going to open parentheses, type a 4 and close it. I'm going to open a parentheses, type negative 5, and close it. I'm going to open a parentheses, type that negative 2, and close it. Notice each time I'm hitting the negative, well, you can't really see it, I'm not hitting the subtraction key that's near the plus and minus and divide buttons. I'm hitting the negative key that's the white button near the bottom of my calculator. And I almost forgot to get this negative 1 still. And I close it. And when I hit equals, it gives me a 120. Okay? Now, when we actually get to this unit, there's a way I would have known that this would have been a positive, because I'm multiplying a negative, a negative, a negative, a negative. If you have an even number of negatives being multiplied together, they kill each other off in pairs. So another approach that they'll talk about is counting up how many negatives are being multiplied. And if it's an odd number, then your result would be a negative. And if it's an even number of negatives, you end up with a positive. If all that went in one ear and out the other, that's fine. The goal for today is to have another time where together we're looking at calculator and typing some expressions in. The actual concept of negative numbers is the focus of lesson 6. And so we're going to focus more on those rules when we get there. But I've found that if I introduce it now, those of you who have your calculators, it works out just fine. Okay, number 10. Now we're going to deal with exponents. And we've started to talk about exponents. Let's take a look at typing this one in. So I've got a negative 4 that's in parentheses, so let me put that in parentheses. Open, put the negative button, and actually let me just show you what I typed. I open the parentheses as usual with that button, and I'm typing my negative 4, so I hit this button, and then the 4, and then I close the parentheses. And I know you can't see the display. I'll slide it down in a second. But now I have to raise it to the third power. Don't hit your x squared button. That's if you're raising a power of 2. if you're raising something to the power of 2. We do that so much they give us this special x squared button because we square things all the time. But the button above it, this button up here that looks like the roof of a house, it's called the caret button, but its math name is it's the exponentiation button or the exponent button. And this is the one that allows us to raise something to any power we choose. So I'm going to hit that. And I'm going to show you what the calculator, it puts a little caret up above, one of those little symbols. And now I have to tell it what power I want, which is the third power. So I type that. And notice on a calculator, it doesn't show it up above. Some more expensive calculators actually do show those little 3s up above, which is kind of nice. But this calculator is a standard one, and it's pretty nice for the money, so that's the one that we usually use. But on some calculators, it wouldn't surprise me if you showed me a calculator that actually draws a little 3 hovering up, just like it's showing here. I hit equals, and it gives me negative 64. Let me just explain where that negative 64 came from. A negative to the third power is a negative times a negative times a negative. If there's an odd number of negatives, that negative survives. The 64 comes from 4 times 4 times 4. It's 4 times itself, the exponent number of times. 4 times 4 is 16. 16 times 4 is 64. We don't have to have any of that memorized, but I just wanted you to see what's going on kind of behind the scenes and where that number comes from. Okay, let's do another one. This one you have to be careful. This one, our calculators like to fix it for us and type what we didn't type. This negative 2 to the fourth power, this is a critical teaching moment, so I want to make sure if you kind of got bored going through all these thousands of problems, I want to make sure that you recognize the only time we take a negative to a power is if it's in the parentheses. This negative is not being raised to the fourth, so I have to treat this as the negative of 2 to the fourth. And so when I do this on my calculator, if I type negative 2 and I raise it to the fourth, notice that my calculator is showing me a negative 16. Okay? Because there's only one of these negatives. The negative is not being raised to the fourth. The reason I caution you, there are some calculators that think when you type this, they think that you meant to type this. So let me start this over. Had this negative 2 been in parentheses, negative 2, close parentheses, and raise that to the fourth power, then if there's 4 of these negatives, 4 negatives cancel each other out. You get a positive 16. Now, if you not that you have to see it on the piece of paper to believe me, but the correct answer for this question is negative 16. There are not 4 of these negatives. There's only 1. But on some calculators, when you don't type the parentheses around the negative 2, they actually think you wanted it, and they type them in for you and give you an answer of positive 16. That is incorrect. You need to know the rule. And so that's one that I want to caution you about your calculators. We will come back and talk more about that when it's relevant again. Okay, here's a division problem. I'm going to do it on my calculator in a moment, but I want to see if you can recall how we apply the division rule with same or different. Okay, the multiplication and division rule is the same for multiplication and division. It says your answer numerically is just whatever you get when you do 35 divided by 7. And a lot of you probably know that one just from your multiplication facts. In this case, a division fact. That gives me a 5. Now, is it a positive 5 or a negative 5? And the way you decide if it's positive or negative is if the two signs were same or different. And the two signs are the same. Same gives me a positive 5. So you'll see the answer is positive 5. Now, please recognize that I'm bouncing back and forth between looking at the rules and having the rules help me think through the logic of what we end up with. But I'm also saying our calculators can help us with these. I want you to know both. I want you to take, when we get to lesson 6, and we're going through those sign number rules more specifically, I want you to make sure you're unraveling the rules, thinking about the rules, thinking about why this is a positive 5 instead of a negative 5, etc. However, in the long haul of the course, and in most of your life, you'll be allowed to use a calculator. Like if you get hired at a place where there's calculations to do, your boss isn't going to say, oh, no, calculator's allowed here. They're going to say, of course you should use a calculator. So I want you to get used to the calculator. So let's go ahead and do that. Both of these negatives are going to be that little negative button at the bottom, this button here. So when I get to those, that's what I'm going to type. And obviously the division is just your regular old division button that's over here. And let's go ahead and type that in. Trying to get all this on screen. Close enough. So negative 35, I hit the little negative button at the way bottom, divided by, and my calculator shows that as a slash, but I typed the division button, not the fraction button. Open parentheses, the negative key, 7, close parentheses, and then I hit equals. And it gives me a positive 5. My calculator knows when you're dividing or multiplying two sign numbers that you simply divide them. So it did 35 divided by 7, and then it said those two signs are the same. And the rule says if the numbers are the same, then the result is positive. Okay. Last one in this string of problems that we're going to do. It's a division of two sign numbers. Negative 800, so I typed that little negative way at the bottom. I did not hit the subtraction key. Divided by 8, so I'm hitting my division key, my 8, and when I hit equals, we get negative 100. I just typed it in as a calculator problem, but let's just kind of unravel it. The rule says if you're dividing, that the numerical part, you just do the division. So 800 divided by 8 is 100. And that the resulting sign is based on same or different. When they're different, the resulting sign, when they're different, is negative. And so these two signs were different, so we end up with negative 100.